The scream tore through the storm-soaked afternoon like a knife through silk, and Harrison Reeves dropped the reins of his horse without a second thought, his boots already churning through the mud toward the collapsing hillside, where a woman's terrified voice echoed above the roar of sliding earth and timber. Rain had been falling for 3 days straight in Placerville, California, turning the mining town streets into rivers of churning brown water and transforming the hills surrounding the settlement into treacherous slopes of saturated soil. It was April of 1857, and Harrison had seen his share of spring storms during his 26 years, but nothing quite like this relentless downpour that seemed determined to wash the entire town down into the valley below. He had been riding back from delivering a telegram to the mining office on the eastern edge of town when he heard that scream, a sound so raw with terror that it bypassed his mind entirely and went straight to his legs, propelling him forward before conscious thought could catch up. The hillside was giving way in sheets, great slabs of mud and rock peeling off like skin from a sunburn, and there in the midst of it was a woman in a pale blue dress, her dark hair plastered to her face as she tried desperately to scramble up the slope even as it dissolved beneath her feet. She was perhaps 20 yards up from the base of the hill, caught in a nightmare where every handhold crumbled and every footfall sent her sliding backward. A small wooden structure, what looked like it might have been a storage shed, was collapsing above her, its timbers groaning as the earth beneath it liquefied. Harrison did not hesitate. He ran straight into the mud, feeling it suck at his boots with every step, threatening to pull him down into its hungry embrace. The woman screamed again, and he saw her slide another few feet down the hillside, her hands grasping at nothing but wet earth and stones. He could see her face now, pale with terror, her eyes wide and desperate as she fought against the inevitable pull of gravity and mud. "Hold on," he shouted, though he knew his voice was barely audible over the storm. "I am coming." The mud was up to his knees now, thick and heavy, making every movement an effort of will. He could feel the hill shifting beneath him, could sense the instability in the way the ground seemed to breathe and pulse with the weight of all that water. Above them, the shed finally gave way with a splintering crash, and Harrison threw himself forward, grabbing the woman around the waist just as a beam came tumbling down past them, missing his shoulder by inches. She gasped, her hands clutching at his shirt, his arms, anywhere she could find purchase. He could feel her trembling, feel the frantic beat of her heart against his chest as he held her tight and tried to find solid footing. The hillside was still moving, still sliding, and he knew they had only seconds before the whole thing came down on top of them. "We have to go sideways," he said directly into her ear, his voice rough with exertion. "Not down, not up. Sideways to where the ground is more stable. Can you move with me?" She nodded against his shoulder, and he felt a surge of respect for her courage. Many people would have panicked completely, would have frozen or fought against him, but she was listening, trying to work with him even in her terror. He began to move, taking careful sidelong steps, keeping his center of gravity low and his grip on her firm. Every movement sent little rivers of mud flowing past them, and twice he felt his feet start to slip, but he caught himself each time, adjusting, compensating, refusing to let them both go down. The woman whimpered once when another section of hillside gave way behind them, sending a fresh wave of mud cascading down, but she did not scream again. She kept moving with him, step by careful step, until finally, he felt something more solid beneath his right foot. Rock, or at least clay that had not yet been completely saturated. He pushed toward it, pulling her with him, and then they were on firmer ground, still on the hillside but no longer in immediate danger of being buried alive. He did not stop moving until they reached the base of the hill where the mud gave way to the flooded street. Only then did he release her, his arms aching from the effort of holding them both upright through that nightmare traverse. She collapsed against a hitching post, gasping for breath, covered head to toe in mud that was slowly being washed away by the rain. Harrison bent over, hands on his knees, trying to get his own breathing under control, aware that his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was hoarse but clear, cultured in a way that spoke of education and refinement. "Thank you, you saved my life." He looked up at her properly for the first time. Despite the mud and the rain and the terror she had just endured, he could see that she was beautiful, with fine features and large dark eyes that held both intelligence and a lingering shadow of fear. She was younger than he had initially thought, perhaps 23 or 24, and there was something about the way she held herself, even in her current bedraggled state, that spoke of strength and determination. "What were you doing up there?" he asked, straightening up. "That hillside has been unstable for days. Everyone knows to stay away from the slopes during weather like this." A flash of something crossed her face, embarrassment perhaps, or guilt. "I was trying to reach my equipment," she said. "I had photographic plates stored in that shed, images I have been working on for months. I thought I could get to them before the structure collapsed." "Photographic plates?" Harrison felt his eyebrows rise. "You are a photographer." "I am," she said, lifting her chin slightly as if expecting him to challenge this. "My name is Katherine Walsh. I came to Placerville 6 months ago to document the mining operations and the town itself. Those plates represented half a year of work, and now they are gone, buried under all that mud." Harrison glanced back at the hillside, where the shed had completely disappeared beneath tons of earth and debris. Nothing was going to be recovered from that mess, not anytime soon and possibly not ever. "Better the plates than you," he said simply. "Equipment can be replaced, people cannot." Katherine Walsh looked at him for a long moment, water streaming down her face, and then she smiled, a small, shaky thing that nevertheless transformed her features. "You are right, of course. I was foolish to try. I just could not bear the thought of losing all that work." She paused, then extended a muddy hand toward him. "You saved my life, and I do not even know your name." He took her hand, feeling the coldness of her fingers, the slight tremor that still ran through them. "Harrison Reeves," he said. "I run cattle on a ranch about 5 miles south of town. I was just delivering a message when I heard you scream. Well, Mr. Reeves, I owe you a debt I can never possibly repay." She swayed slightly, and he quickly put a hand on her elbow to steady her. "You are in shock," he said. "We need to get you somewhere warm and dry. Where are you staying?" "The boarding house on Main Street," she said. "Mrs. Patterson's establishment." Harrison knew it, a respectable place run by a widow who catered to the more refined visitors to Placerville. "Come on," he said. "I will see you there safely. Can you walk?" She nodded, though he could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. He retrieved his horse, which had sensibly moved away from the unstable hillside and was waiting patiently near a water trough. And then he walked beside Katherine through the flooded streets, leading the animal with one hand and keeping the other hovering near her elbow in case she stumbled. She did not speak, and he respected her silence, understanding that she needed time to process what had just happened. Mrs. Patterson met them at the door of the boarding house, her round face creased with concern. "Miss Walsh, good heavens, what happened to you? You are covered in mud." "There was an incident on the hillside," Katherine said, her voice steady despite her obvious fatigue. "Mr. Reeves here saved my life. The shed where I stored my equipment collapsed during a mudslide and I was caught in it." Mrs. Patterson's eyes went wide, and she immediately began fussing over Katherine, ushering her inside. "Come in, come in. We need to get you into a hot bath immediately before you catch your death. And you too, Mr. Reeves, please come in out of this dreadful rain." Harrison hesitated. "I should get back to my ranch. My men will be wondering where I am." "Nonsense," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You just saved Miss Walsh's life. The least we can do is offer you a hot meal and a chance to dry off. Besides, you are as covered in mud as she is. Come in, I insist." He found himself being herded inside despite his protests, and soon he was in the parlor with a towel and a cup of hot coffee, while Katherine was upstairs being tended to by Mrs. Patterson and her assistant. The boarding house was warm and dry, a sharp contrast to the storm raging outside, and Harrison had to admit that it felt good to sit down and let the tension drain out of his muscles. His hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline, and his clothes were soaked through with a mixture of rain and mud that was now dripping onto Mrs. Patterson's floor, despite the towel he had wrapped around his shoulders. He was on his second cup of coffee when Katherine reappeared, transformed. She had changed into a dry dress of deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, still damp but clean. She looked younger somehow, more vulnerable without the mud and the fear, but also more composed, as if the hot bath had restored some of her equilibrium. "Mr. Reeves," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I wanted to thank you again, properly this time, now that I am not quite so covered in half the hillside." He found himself smiling despite himself. "It was nothing, Miss Walsh. Anyone would have done the same." "I think we both know that is not true," she said quietly. "You risked your own life to save someone you had never met. That is not nothing, Mr. Reeves. That is extraordinary." He felt his face heat with embarrassment and took a sip of his coffee to cover it. "You were in trouble. I helped. That is all there is to it. Mrs. Patterson bustled in with a tray of food, sandwiches, and soup that steamed in the cool air. "Here we are," she said. "Miss Walsh, you need to eat something. You have had a terrible shock. And Mr. Reeves, I will not take no for an answer. You have earned this meal 10 times over." They ate together in companionable silence, and Harrison found himself stealing glances at Katherine when he thought she was not looking. There was something about her that fascinated him, something beyond her obvious beauty. It was the way she held herself, the intelligence in her eyes, the courage she had shown on that hillside even in the face of death. Most women of his acquaintance would have been hysterical for hours after such an experience, but Katherine had recovered quickly, had thanked him with dignity, and was now eating her soup with steady hands as if mudslides and near-death experiences were just another part of her day. "You said you are a photographer," he said after a while. "That is an unusual profession for a woman." She looked up at him, and he saw a flash of defiance in her eyes. "Unusual, yes, but not unheard of. I studied under Matthew Brady in New York before coming west." "Photography is an art form, Mr. Reeves, and like all art, it does not care about the gender of the artist." "I did not mean any offense," he said quickly. "I was simply curious. I have never met a woman photographer before." Her expression softened. "Forgive me. I am used to defending my choices. Most people think a woman should be content with marriage and children, and while I have nothing against either of those things, I also wanted more. I wanted to see the world, to capture moments in time, to create something that would last beyond my own lifetime." She paused, then smiled ruefully. "Or at least I did before all my work ended up buried under a mudslide." "Will you start again?" Harrison asked. With new plates and equipment, Katherine was quiet for a moment, staring down at her soup. "I do not know," she said finally. "The equipment is expensive, and I used most of my savings to come out here and set up my studio. I was hoping to sell my photographs back east, to magazines and newspapers interested in the California gold country. But without the plates I already created, I have nothing to sell, and without money, I cannot buy new equipment to start over. Harrison felt a strange tightness in his chest at the thought of this remarkable woman giving up her dreams because of an accident of weather. "There must be something that can be done," he said. "Perhaps you could borrow equipment or find a patron willing to invest in your work." "Perhaps," Katherine said, but her tone was doubtful. "In any case, that is a problem for tomorrow. Today I am simply grateful to be alive thanks to you." They talked for another hour, and Harrison found himself telling her about his ranch, about the cattle he raised and the land he worked. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about the business of ranching in California, and he realized with some surprise that he was enjoying himself immensely. It had been a long time since he had talked with someone who engaged him on this level, who seemed interested in his thoughts and opinions rather than just his status as a relatively successful rancher. Eventually, the rain began to ease, and Harrison knew he needed to get back to his property. His foreman would be capable of handling things in his absence, but he had responsibilities that could not be ignored indefinitely. He stood reluctantly, aware that he did not want to leave, did not want this strange, unexpected afternoon to end. "I should go," he said. "But Miss Walsh, if there is anything I can do to help with your situation, please let me know. I meant what I said about finding a way for you to continue your work." Katherine rose as well, and there was something in her eyes as she looked at him that made his heart beat faster. "You have already done more than enough, Mr. Reeves, but I appreciate the offer, truly." He tipped his hat to her and to Mrs. Patterson, then stepped out into the now gentle rain. As he rode back toward his ranch, he could not stop thinking about Katherine Walsh, about her courage and intelligence, about the way her smile had transformed her face. He told himself it was simply the aftermath of the dramatic rescue, that his interest in her would fade once the excitement of the day wore off. But deep down, he suspected that was not true. Something had shifted in him on that muddy hillside, something that went beyond simple heroism or the satisfaction of saving a life. He had looked into Katherine Walsh's eyes, and he had seen someone who might understand him, someone who might share his dreams of building something lasting and meaningful in this rough, beautiful country. And that realization both thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having finally blown itself out during the night. Harrison was up with the sun as always, checking on his cattle and conferring with his foreman about the damage the rain had caused. Several fences were down, and one of the streams that ran through his property had flooded its banks, creating a temporary lake in what was usually a grazing meadow. It would take days to repair everything, but the damage could have been worse. They had been lucky. Despite the press of work, Harrison found his thoughts returning again and again to Katherine. He wondered how she was doing, whether she had recovered from the shock of yesterday's near disaster, whether she was making plans to continue her photography work or preparing to return east in defeat. The thought of her leaving Placerville left him with an unexpected sense of loss, which was absurd considering he had only just met her. Yet he could not shake the feeling that something important had begun on that hillside, something that deserved a chance to grow. By noon, he had made up his mind. He cleaned up, changed into his better clothes, and rode into town, telling himself he was simply checking on the well-being of someone he had helped, that it was the decent thing to do. His heart, however, knew better. His heart was pounding with anticipation as he tied his horse outside Mrs. Patterson's boarding house and knocked on the door. Mrs. Patterson answered, her face breaking into a warm smile when she saw him. "Mr. Reeves, how lovely to see you again. I assume you are here to inquire about Miss Walsh." "If she is receiving visitors," Harrison said, suddenly feeling awkward. What if she did not want to see him? What if she considered yesterday's events a closed chapter and had no interest in furthering their acquaintance? "I am sure she would be delighted, Mrs. Patterson said, ushering him into the parlor. "She was just saying this morning how much she owed you. Please sit down and I will let her know you are here." Harrison sat on the edge of a chair, his hat in his hands, feeling ridiculously nervous. He had faced down angry bulls, had dealt with cattle rustlers and natural disasters, had built a successful ranch from nothing through sheer determination and hard work. Yet the prospect of seeing Katherine Walsh again had him as jittery as a boy courting his first girl. She appeared in the doorway a moment later, and his breath caught in his throat. In the daylight streaming through the parlor windows, she was even more beautiful than he remembered, her dark hair shining, her skin luminous despite the shadows of fatigue under her eyes. She wore a simple dress of brown calico, practical rather than fancy, but she wore it with such grace that it might have been the finest silk. "Mr. Reeves," she said, and there was genuine pleasure in her voice. "What a wonderful surprise! Please do not get up." But he was already on his feet, years of his mother's training in manners too ingrained to ignore. "Miss Walsh, I hope I am not intruding. I simply wanted to check on you to make sure you had recovered from yesterday's ordeal." "That is very kind of you," she said, settling into a chair near him. "I am quite well, all things considered. A little sore from being thrown about on that hillside, and my pride is certainly bruised from my foolish decision to try to rescue those photographic plates, but otherwise unharmed thanks to you." "I am glad to hear it," Harrison said. He hesitated, then plunged ahead before he could lose his nerve. "Miss Walsh, I have been thinking about your situation, about your photography equipment and the work you lost. I have a proposition for you if you will hear me out." Interest sparked in her eyes. "I am listening." "My ranch covers several thousand acres of some of the most beautiful country in California," he said. "Mountains, valleys, rivers, and the cattle themselves. I think it would make compelling subject matter for photographs, the kind of images that people back east would be interested in seeing. If you were willing to come out to the ranch and document the ranching life, I would be happy to provide you with room and board while you work, and I would purchase whatever equipment you need to replace what was lost in the mudslide." Katherine stared at him, her lips slightly parted in surprise. "Mr. Reeves, that is an incredibly generous offer, but I could not possibly accept. It would not be proper for an unmarried woman to stay at your ranch, and besides, I have no way to repay you for such an investment." "The photographs would be repayment enough," Harrison said. "I am not looking for money, Miss Walsh. I am simply offering you a chance to continue your work while you figure out your next steps. As for propriety, my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, lives on the property with her husband, who is my foreman. She would be happy to act as chaperone and companion for you during your stay. Everything would be completely respectable." He could see her wavering, could see the hope and uncertainty warring in her expression. "Why would you do this?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me. I could be a terrible photographer for all you know. Why would you invest in my work?" Harrison met her eyes directly. "Because yesterday on that hillside, I saw someone who was willing to risk her life for her art, for something she believed in. That kind of dedication is rare, Miss Walsh. It deserves to be supported. And because," he paused, then continued with complete honesty, "I would very much like to see you again, to know you better, and this seems like a way to make that possible while also helping you pursue your dreams." Color rose in her cheeks, and she looked down at her hands folded in her lap. The silence stretched between them, and Harrison felt his heart sinking. He had been too forward, had revealed too much too soon. She was going to refuse, and he would have embarrassed them both for nothing. Then she looked up, and there was a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You are either the most generous man I have ever met, Mr. Reeves, or the most foolish. I am not entirely sure which." "Perhaps both," he said, daring to smile back at her. "Does that mean you will accept?" "It means I will think about it," she said. "It is a significant decision and not one I should make lightly. May I have a day or two to consider?" "Of course," Harrison said, though his heart was singing with hope. She had not refused outright. She was considering it. That was more than he had dared to hope for. "Take all the time you need. I will be in town for the next few days dealing with some business matters. You can reach me at the Silver Dollar Hotel when you have made your decision." They talked for a while longer about inconsequential things, but Harrison was intensely aware of every word she spoke, every expression that crossed her face. When he finally took his leave, promising to await her answer, he felt as if he were walking on air. It was absurd, he knew. He barely knew this woman. Yet somehow, in the space of a single day, she had become vitally important to him, and the thought of her agreeing to his proposal filled him with a joy he had not felt in years. Katherine watched Harrison Reeves walk down the path from the boarding house, her heart in turmoil. She had been completely honest when she told him she needed time to think, but the truth was that part of her wanted to say yes immediately, propriety and caution be damned. There was something about Harrison that drew her like a moth to flame, something beyond his obvious good looks and the heroism he had displayed in saving her life. It was the way he looked at her, as if he truly saw her, not just a woman but a person with dreams and ambitions of her own. It was the respect in his voice when he talked about her work, the genuine interest he showed in her thoughts and opinions. She had come west to escape the suffocating expectations of her family in New York, to forge her own path and prove that a woman could succeed in a field dominated by men. The loss of her photographic plates had been devastating, not just because of the financial implications, but because it felt like a sign that she had been foolish to believe she could make it on her own. Harrison's offer was a lifeline, a chance to continue her work, but it was also something more. It was an opportunity to explore whatever this strange, powerful attraction was that hummed between them, this sense of possibility that both excited and frightened her. "He is a good man," Mrs. Patterson said from the doorway, making Katherine jump. She had been so lost in thought she had not heard the older woman approach. "Harrison Reeves has a solid reputation in these parts, honest, hardworking, fair in his dealings. If he says everything will be proper and respectable, you can believe him." "I do believe him," Katherine said. "That is not what concerns me." "Then what does?" Mrs. Patterson came to stand beside her, looking out the window in the direction Harrison had gone. Katherine hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding her thoughts. Mrs. Patterson had been kind to her since her arrival in Placerville, had become something of a friend despite the difference in their ages. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Not of him, but of what accepting his offer might mean. I came west to be independent, to build a career, to prove that I do not need a man to define my life. If I accept his help, if I let him purchase equipment for me and provide me with room and board, am I not giving up that independence? Am I not proving that I cannot succeed on my own after all?" Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment, considering this. Then she said, "Independence does not mean refusing all help, my dear. It means making your own choices, following your own dreams, being true to yourself. If accepting Mr. Reeves' offer allows you to continue your photography work, if it gives you a chance to build the career you want, then that is not dependence. That is simply accepting help from someone who believes in you and your abilities. There is no shame in that. And if there is more to his offer than simply supporting my work, Katherine asked. He said he wants to know me better. He was quite clear about that. A smile tugged at Mrs. Patterson's lips. And would that be so terrible? He is young, handsome, successful, and clearly taken with you. Many women would consider that a stroke of good fortune. Many women did not spend the last 5 years fighting for the right to be taken seriously as an artist, Katherine said, but there was no heat in her words. She was thinking of the way Harrison had looked at her, the warmth in his eyes, the strength in his arms as he had held her safe on that muddy hillside. She was thinking of the conversation they had shared yesterday, the ease with which they had talked, as if they had known each other for years rather than hours. Life is not all one thing or another, Katherine, Mrs. Patterson said gently. You can be an artist and a woman in love. You can have a career and a partner who supports it. The two are not mutually exclusive, no matter what society might try to tell you. Katherine turned to look at the older woman. I have only just met him. How can I possibly know if this is worth pursuing? You cannot, Mrs. Patterson said simply. That is the nature of love, my dear. It requires a leap of faith. But from what I saw yesterday and today, I would say Mr. Reeves is worth the risk. That night, Katherine lay in her bed listening to the sounds of Placerville settling down for the night, and she thought about risks and rewards, about independence and connection, about the life she had planned, and the life that might be possible if she was brave enough to reach for it. She thought about the feel of Harrison's arms around her, the steadiness of his presence, the way he had risked his own life without hesitation to save hers. She thought about his offer, generous beyond measure, and about the hope that had kindled in her chest when he said he wanted to know her better. By morning, her decision was made. She dressed with care, choosing her best day dress of deep blue cotton, and walked through the town to the Silver Dollar Hotel. The desk clerk directed her to room 7, and she climbed the stairs with her heart pounding, hoping she was not making a terrible mistake. Harrison answered her knock almost immediately, and the expression of joy that crossed his face when he saw her told her everything she needed to know about his feelings. Miss Walsh, he said, please come in. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, she said, stepping into the room. It was a simple space, functional rather than fancy, with a bed, a chair, and a small table by the window. I've come to give you my answer about your proposal. He stood very still, his hands clenched at his sides as if he were physically restraining himself from reaching for her. And what is your answer? Yes, Katherine said, and she could not keep the smile from her face. Yes, Mr. Reeves, I will accept your generous offer. I will come to your ranch and photograph the ranching life, and I will do my best to create work that justifies your faith in me. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. That is wonderful news, he said. You will not regret this, Miss Walsh. I promise you that. There is one condition, Katherine said, holding up a hand. This is a business arrangement, at least initially. You are my patron, and I am your photographer. I will work hard to create images that are worth the investment you are making in me. Whatever else might develop between us, if anything does, will have to happen naturally, without pressure or expectation. Can you agree to that? Harrison nodded immediately. Of course. I would not want it any other way. You are a professional, and I respect that. I will never do anything to compromise your work or your reputation, Miss Walsh. You have my word. Then I suppose we have an agreement, Katherine said, extending her hand. He took it, and she felt that same jolt of connection she had experienced when they first met, a sense of rightness that went beyond words or logic. When would you like to begin? Harrison asked, still holding her hand. As soon as possible, Katherine said. The sooner I can purchase new equipment and start working, the better. I have been idle too long already. Then we will go to Sacramento tomorrow, Harrison said decisively. There is a photography supply shop there that should have everything you need. We can take the stage, make our purchases, and be back within a few days. Does that suit you? That suits me perfectly, Katherine said, and she meant it. For the first time since the mudslide, she felt hope rising in her chest, felt the familiar excitement that came with the prospect of new work, new images to capture, new stories to tell. And underneath it all, running like a current beneath still water, was the awareness of Harrison Reeves, of his presence and his care, of the possibilities that stretched before them like an open road. The trip to Sacramento was an adventure in itself. The stage was crowded with miners heading back to the city with their earnings, businessmen making deals, and a family of settlers moving further east in search of better land. Katherine and Harrison sat side by side, their shoulders touching whenever the coach hit a particularly rough patch of road, which was often. They talked quietly while the other passengers dozed or argued or stared out the windows at the passing landscape. Harrison told her about his childhood in Missouri, about the family farm he had left behind to seek his fortune in California. He spoke of the back-breaking work of building his ranch from nothing, of the lean years when he barely scraped by, of the satisfaction he felt now that his hard work was beginning to pay off. Katherine, in turn, told him about growing up in New York, about her fascination with photography from the moment she saw her first daguerreotype, about the long battle with her parents who believed a woman's place was in the home, not behind a camera. They wanted me to marry, she said, watching the rolling hills pass by outside the window. They had a suitable young man all picked out, the son of my father's business partner. He was perfectly nice, perfectly respectable, perfectly boring. I knew that if I married him, I would spend the rest of my life hosting dinner parties and managing servants and never doing anything that mattered to me. So I took the money my grandmother left me and came west before they could stop me. That took courage, Harrison said quietly. Not many women would be willing to give up security and comfort for the sake of their dreams. Not many women are given the chance, Katherine replied. I was lucky to have my grandmother's inheritance. Without it, I would have had no choice but to accept the life my parents planned for me. Do you regret it? Harrison asked. Coming west, I mean, especially after everything that has happened. Katherine considered this. No, she said finally. Even with the mudslide and the loss of my work, I do not regret it. I would rather fail at something I love than succeed at something that means nothing to me. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Harrison said, and the understanding in his eyes warmed her from the inside out. They reached Sacramento in the late afternoon, and Harrison secured them rooms at a respectable hotel, making sure Katherine had a chaperone in the form of an older woman who traveled with her married daughter. The next morning, they visited the photography supply shop, a cramped space filled with cameras, chemicals, glass plates, and all the other paraphernalia of the photographer's trade. Katherine moved through the shop like a child in a toy store, her eyes lighting up as she examined the equipment. Harrison watched her with a small smile on his face, fascinated by her knowledge and passion. She discussed the merits of different cameras with the shop owner, a balding man named Mr. Steinberg, who was clearly impressed by her expertise. She selected her equipment with care, choosing quality over quantity, and Harrison paid for everything without flinching despite the substantial cost. Are you sure about this? Katherine asked him quietly as Mr. Steinberg wrapped their purchases. This is a significant investment. I am sure, Harrison said firmly. "Consider it an investment in the future, Miss Walsh. Your future and perhaps, if you will allow it, ours." That evening they dined together in the hotel restaurant, and the conversation flowed as easily as wine. They talked about books and politics, about the changes coming to California as more and more settlers arrived, about the beauty of the land and the challenges of making a life in such an untamed place. Katherine found herself laughing more than she had in months, found herself relaxing in Harrison's presence in a way she had not relaxed with anyone in a very long time. After dinner, Harrison walked her to her room, and they stood in the hallway for a moment, neither quite willing to say good night. "Thank you for today," Katherine said, "for everything. You have given me back my work, and I cannot tell you how much that means to me." "The thanks are unnecessary," Harrison said. "Seeing you happy is reward enough." He hesitated, then added, "Katherine, may I call you Katherine?" "Miss Walsh seems too formal given everything we have shared." "Only if I may call you Harrison," she said, her heart beating faster at the intimacy of first names. "I would like that very much," he said. He took her hand, raised it to his lips, and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and it made her breath catch in her throat. "Good night, Katherine. Sleep well." "Good night, Harrison," she managed to say. And then she was in her room with the door closed, her hand pressed to her chest as if she could calm her racing heart through sheer force of will. They returned to Placerville 2 days later, laden with equipment and supplies, and Harrison arranged for everything to be transported to his ranch. Katherine spent a final night at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, packing her belongings and saying goodbye to the few friends she had made in town. Mrs. Patterson hugged her warmly and whispered in her ear, "Be happy, my dear. You deserve it." The next morning, Harrison arrived with a wagon, and they made the 5-mile journey to his ranch together. Katherine watched the landscape change as they left the mining town behind, watched as the scarred hillsides gave way to rolling grasslands dotted with cattle, watched as the mountains rose in the distance like sentinels guarding the valley. It was beautiful country, wild and open, and she felt her photographer,